Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
If you've ever wished you could improve your interviewing and screening skills by becoming a human lie detector, you're going to love this episode of the Workology podcast. Today's guest is Robin Dreeke. He is a professional interrogator, founder of People Formula, and he's a former head of the FBI Behavioral Analysis Program. His new book, Sizing People Up, a Veteran FBI Agent's User Manual for Behavior Prediction, came out in January. Robin, welcome to the Workology podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jessica. I'm excited to share with y'all.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. You were an FBI agent, special agent, and head of the FBI Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program for 21 years. And now you've been teaching people advanced communication strategies for more than a decade. What led you from federal government employee to founding People Formula and working as a speaker and consultant?
It was kind of a natural transition, really. At a certain point in my career, back in 2008, I was asked to go down to Quantico, Virginia, where they wanted me to teach and train people on interviewing skills for counterintelligence, as well as recruitment, strategies for recruiting spies. And I'd been on my behavioral team for a number of years. And in 2010, I took it over. But this was the first time I actually sat down and tried to make this subjective art form of interpersonal relationships and communication and make it a paint by number so other people could repeat it. And as soon as I started doing that, the fog started clearing because, whether you're trying to recruit a spy or trying to sell a product, it's all exactly the same process, believe it or not. And I started seeing things with a lot more clarity. And I had a good friend of mine, his name is Joe Navarro, retired special agent on my behavioral team, international nonverbal expert and best-selling author and all that. And he was of the mind of, hey, if you have at least one bit of information another human being can benefit from, shame on you for not getting it out. So he was very big on publish, 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 publish. So as soon as I started publishing articles and then my first book, it all kind of took off from there. So people contacted me for speaking. So there you go. And it kept growing as I wrote other books and stuff like that.
You are my first FBI agent on the podcast. I've had a rocket scientist, but not an FBI agent. So there's really so much I want to ask you, but I'm going to stick with our topic today, which is what HR leaders are tuning into and they want to know. We spend a lot of time with face-to-face conversations or phone interviews with candidates as well as employees. What are some red flags that we might not already know that you could tell us about if someone isn't being honest?
Deception's a really tough thing. And matter of fact, I'll be the first one to teach and preach. You cannot detect deception. The best people in the world, if they're looking at nonverbals alone, are 50% accurate at best. What you can detect, though, is stress. And stress can be deception, but stress can also be bad memories. It could be a bad thought. So, and especially during an interview process, if you're asking some normal baseline questions to establish what their normal nonverbals and patterns of speech are like where they're from, what their background is, what their name is, where they live, all those types of things, you're getting what normal looks like. And then when you start asking questions, that are a little bit more precise about, their skill sets, types of strategies they have in different situations that they dealt with at work, whatever the skill, whatever the question is. If you're seeing deviations from that normal and you're seeing stress induced non-verbally, where, they might get lip compression, eyebrow compression, basically where things are kind of scrunching in on them. That's a sign that, all right, that's causing a little bit of stress in them. It's not necessarily bad, but what happens though is if they're saying positive things in a very, self-aggrandizing type manner in terms of what you're asking, but they're also showing stress, then you start getting a little bit of incongruence between what they're saying and what they're emotionally feeling. And that's going to be a red flag for me.
I find it interesting that deception is hard, but then again, I don't, because I think about all the times that, I've gotten duped and maybe believed that somebody was a good hire or bought something I shouldn't have, or, my daughter told me that she didn't eat the cookies when she did. So it's a hard one to identify.
And it is. And the reason why is because a lot of people, it's easier to figure out ways to like someone And once you like someone, which is very subjective because basically liking is based on similar morals, ethics, background, ethnicity. There's a lot of areas where we try to look for overlap with other human beings, but that actually has nothing to do with being able to trust them necessarily, because trust is a different thing for me. Trust is actually about predicting behavior, so I can reasonably expect what I can have from this relationship with you. Just because I like you doesn't mean I can actually trust you to, drive my car, fly a plane, keep me safe. There's lots of things that you might not have a skill set for, even though I like you. So I think that's the challenge that people have, is discerning between, our intuition, which is ruled a lot by liking or disliking, as well compared to cognitive assessment of what I can reasonably expect someone to do.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up trust, because your new book, Sizing People Up, a veteran FBI agent's user manual for behavior prediction, isn't just about how to tell if someone is lying. You talk about predicting the behavior of others, and that it's so important for anyone whose work involves relationships with others, whether it's leading an organization or collaborating with others. And we do a lot of that in our jobs within human resources. What is your advice for being better at building trust in the workplace?
Absolutely. Because everything comes down to relationships, absolutely everything. So that's what the book is about. It's like you said, it's not about predicting deception or anything like that. It's about understanding people at a much deeper level so you can have that good, healthy relationship, because you're able to manage your expectations. So it's about looking at these signs and just assessing, what I can reasonably expect from each of these different situations.
So is it just about determining who we can trust and who we can't, or is it more complicated than that?
Both I wouldn't say more complicated. It's not, because this really isn't complicated. It's just deeper than the surface level, because you want to be able to see, especially whether it's an interview over, if it's multiple interviews that you're onboarding someone, you can get some signs. And even at the first one, there's a few things you can look for. And again, the point of it is so I can reasonably expect, are you actually vested in me and looking to join our team and bring your resources to bear for us? Or are you keeping self-centered and more focused on yourself? And that's what we're really trying to assess, whether this is a good fit, because a good fit isn't just about bringing a skill set to bear, but it's actually someone who actually can ingratiate themselves in the corporate culture that we have inside this company and form relationships. Because if someone might have a great skill set, but they can't communicate effectively, their personalities are clashing with everyone, who cares if they can, like you said, who cares if they're a rocket scientist or not? If they can't form relationships, they might as well be on a mountain by themselves, because they won't be able to function.
I'm picturing Jason Bourne trying to build trust in the workplace. That's where my mind is going.
Nice. I wish I had that kind of stuff.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast, sponsored by Workology. And we're talking about building trust like a spy with former FBI special agent Robin Dreeke.
Are you tired of putting your professional development on the back burner? It's time for you to invest in yourself with Upskill HR by Workology. We're a membership community focused on personal development for HR. Gain access to our elite community, training, coaching, and events. Learn more at upskillhr.com.
In human resources, we're always looking for the latest and greatest, best tools for determining the right candidates for our openings. I feel like there's a new piece of technology out every single day that says they're going to fix recruiting and they're going to change the hiring process forever. One of the most recent advances in HR, artificial intelligence, I feel like it's everywhere. It's a hot topic, and there is a lot of just discussion around the legality and the ethics of using AI. Bias is a huge problem in screening candidates, and the use of AI right now isn't regulated. And I figured that, as an expert on trust, what are your thoughts on using AI tools to assess job applicants?
Yeah, so I've been looking at this a lot lately, most because of you. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and with the readings I've done, it really reminds me a lot of the polygraph examination. The FBI and a lot of organizations like to use polygraph as a soothsayer, truth measurer, but they're still not admissible in court. Because here's the problem with polygraph exams. They measure physiological responses to stimulus in the form of questions. And they think if you have a spike in your physiological response, that's a stress indicator. And again, as I said earlier, stress is when assessing others. I think, like anything, I think there's some good tools out of it that can help establish baselines of criteria that you want to hire for. But the challenge is this: relationships are really a key bedrock for internal morale for companies. I mean, it's hands down. Unless people feel valued and affiliated with inside a company, it's going to have horrible morale. And if you have horrible morale internally, then your brand is going to be horrible externally as well. And what AI, from the categories I'm looking at here, AI is not going to give you a good assessment of, can this person form relationships with the people already inside the company? So that's a challenge. I'm not saying, that they're accurate or inaccurate in an area, because I'm not an expert on it, but I think the critical area for functioning, it's a challenge.
The reason I wanted to ask you this question, because when I think of like the work that you're doing and your area of expertise, building trust, and also your work as an FBI agent in the areas of interrogation, it's not the same as a job interview, but it could be very similar. And there has been some law and lawsuits that are just kind of percolating and getting started around a lot of different areas of artificial intelligence, but one of them is video interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
And the technology that is being used to show if somebody is being honest or dishonest, truthful or untruthful, using body language. And I didn't know if, in your experience, I mean, I know you likely use these tools. Do you think that AI can replace that skill that you have?
I haven't seen what you saw recently, but in my last, I retired only 2 years ago, and we were looking at just that. We're looking at AI algorithms that were looking at facial recognition and had the facial recognition software to detect deception, and we debunked it. The system didn't work. And that's what we had. I'm not sure, again, I'm not saying who's got something right or who's got something wrong, but the best people in the world are still only 50% accurate using nonverbals alone. And that's a challenge. I think the challenge of the AI side is that combining the components together is what the challenge is. So, I got my 6 signs of assessing others. And in each of these 6 signs, where I'm trying to predict behavior and trying to predict whether I can trust you in the capacity I want to trust you in, as you're sharing that information with me, and I'm looking for key indicators and words and phraseology. So you're demonstrating that you're vested in us, you're demonstrating your longevity with us, you're demonstrating your reliability, your actions, your language, and your emotional stability. I'm also looking at your nonverbal behavior as you're delivering that information from me, to me, so I can actually look at that congruence that I mentioned before. So that is going to be very, very individual for a lot of people, because one person might have, resting angry face, and AI is not going to pick up that that's resting angry face. AI might pick that up as just someone who's stressed and disgruntled. So how do you, I'm not an expert on the programming of it, but I can see some challenges that I'm hoping they're overcoming. I see everything as a great tool. I'm a lover of technology, user of technology, but I think you have to have a lot of data points, and I think it should be used as a tool to supplement a great interviewer with great skills.
Agreed. And I'm just thinking about the tools that you talk about in the book, and how these can be applied in so many instances, not just in the interview process, but as you're engaging your employees, or you're leading your team, or helping develop others, training, just any type of in-person communication. There's a lot of value in your area of expertise, not just for HR, but for business leaders as well.
Yeah, the thing I love the most, when you're engaging any human being for any purpose or situation, is to demonstrate how I value you and how I want to affiliate with you, because we're genetically and biologically coded to want to belong to meaningful groups and organizations and be valued by them. And so if you do one of these 4 things, now think, as I'm describing these things, think in terms of how can AI pick this up? If you seek the thoughts and opinions of others, because we only seek the thoughts and opinions of those people we value. If you talk in terms of their priorities, their needs, wants, dreams, and aspirations, personal, professional, long-term, short-term, basically, we're all hardwired to act in our own best interests in terms of safety, security, and prosperity. So we always have to talk in terms of that. We have to validate people without judging them, because if we start judging you in any way of who you are, your background, your thoughts and opinions, then your shields go up and you don't feel affiliated. And finally, we empower you with choices because we only give people choices that we value. And so a simple way I always give someone a choice is, at the end of what I say or at my request, I say, if that's something you're comfortable with, so that's a choice. Does the AI algorithm pick up that that's a choice? In other words, how out of those 4 categories, how does AI know for that particular individual that they're talking in terms of their priorities, or they're talking in terms of the priorities of the company? Do they I can probably see they recognize seeking a thought and opinion, but there's so many different nuances. How do they recognize validation? Because again, each one of these signs, each one of those techniques is demonstrating that value and affiliation, which actually creates good, healthy relationships. That's a very tough thing to put in an AI program.
Yeah, we're really still at the early stages. I will try to embed a image that I saw at this presentation I was at last night that was talking about the rise and the growth in artificial intelligence. And really, we're just at the beginning of the hockey stick. So the technology is still really new, and it's currently being developed and designed as we speak.
It's exciting stuff. I'm excited to see what they can do with it because here's why. Because the more you can figure out what you need to program the computer to do, the more you personally are going to understand the human beings that you're going to interact with. And so I think it's a dual learning process.
Based on kind of our conversation here, like the technology can't yet do all the things that we can do and you can do as someone who's teaching the tools to be able to be better at building trust and interviewing and selecting candidates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can we as humans be better at understanding and analyzing behavior? And when I'm thinking about this, I'm also thinking about the bias in hiring. How can we have better conversations and also help work to eliminate our own biases that we have?
Even before this, I looked up the definition of bias again, because that's a really tricky one. Because bias, and then when we talked about, before that thing called liking someone and making sure that someone's a good fit for a company, that's it. You get in a little bit of a gray area between the two. But I think really the best thing that I did in my career is creating a desire to be extremely curious about other people. I think the easiest way for myself personally, with the hundreds, if not thousands of people I interviewed from every single walk in life, because if you work counterintelligence, your number one job is to talk to everyone who's not like you. And if you go into those situations with any sort of bias that you're putting on them, they're going to pick up on it, and the shields are going to be up. You're not going to have an exchange. And so over a period of time, I just became immensely curious as to how the other person came to be. How is it that we wound up standing in the same space together? So curiosity has been a great theme I've been noticing with the most successful people in most, in situations, whether it's HR or selling or internal culture or even branding, has been a curiosity about other human beings. This curiosity then allows you to dive deeper to get what I call context. Because once you understand context, in other words, walk a mile in my shoes and see what kind of decisions you would make, from their experiences of their gender, ethnicity, generation, constantly being curious about someone else's experiences, that starts alleviating that bias. Just the other day, I was doing a forward for a book for someone. It was nonverbal behavior for women. I've been doing this my entire life almost. And it wasn't about, interpreting women's nonverbal behavior. It was understanding what a female goes through that, of their nonverbal insecurities from a young age, about how they present themselves in the world and how they feel they're totally being judged, and how it's different than a man is being judged. As like, wow, that is a bias that I didn't even understand, a context I didn't even understand. So all these things, again, having that curiosity really starts to help and overcome that.
You make an interesting point in your book that deception isn't based on dishonesty, but delusion. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, it's basically, people are generally not trying to lie. Believe it or not, one of the reasons why human beings give off all these stress behaviors when they're lying is because lying is stressful for human beings and we don't like it. It takes us out of balance. And so delusion is where you're trying to create a new reality for yourself and try to avoid the actual question or avoid the right answer And they're just trying to create a new reality so they can make themselves feel more comfortable. And so it's kind of easy to see, believe it or not. People ask me all the time, with my background, can you tell when someone's trying to manipulate you? And I'm like, it never gets to that point. And here's why. Because if you're having a good open conversation, because again, my three anchors for everything I do, the number one is create a healthy professional relationship. And the second one is open, honest communication and transparency. And if you don't have that, you can't have the healthy relationship. So if I start seeing a behavior or I'm not getting direct answer on a question or someone overcomplicates something, that's the delusion part that's coming in. And what I generally typically do is I'll go for clarity if I don't understand something. And if I'm getting resistance to clarity and transparency, now I know, hey, this is a hot button issue for this person. Now I just need to assess, is this worthy of stopping the interview? Is it worthy of not continuing a relationship? Or is it something I just want to avoid because I know it's uncomfortable for them?
Interesting. In the FBI, poor judgment can be life or death. Not so much in HR, I guess, but definitely in your job and throughout your career. When we make a bad judgment call about a person, sometimes we hire a bad candidate. With the stakes being significantly lower, what's your best advice to HR leaders on handling mistakes and sizing people up?
First of all, don't beat yourself up over it. It's just not worth it, because again, the human factor is tremendous. There's so many data points that we're taking in. I think the best thing to do is always have a system in place of things, of behaviors, actions, and words that people are exhibiting that you're looking for when doing an interview. And, books like mine help. There's other books, obviously, and information out there on it. Create a criteria. And then the other thing that I would also recommend is after every single interview, debrief yourself on what you saw, what you observed, write it down, and see in time if it holds true or not. And if it doesn't, if something backfires, then assess what you misread there. But also, most importantly, I think, is doing this alone in a vacuum where you're the only one assessing can be very, very detrimental because, again, we have our own personal bias. We've got our own emotional attachment or detachment from things. And so having, I call safe, trusted people that are beta testers. In other words, having someone who did conduct the interview, review your results and see what they see. And likewise, because, having someone who's objective weighing in on things can be very beneficial. That's why when my team would do assessments of people that we're trying to interview as well, I assembled a team of at least 3 people because we have differing points of view, we have different connection points, and we also have different objectivity. So I think, I know it's resource intensive to add people to projects, but anytime you can create a check and balance to prevent these things and also learn from these things, it's helpful.
Well, especially speaking of bias, you want to make sure you have a diverse group who is getting
Absolutely.
to know your job candidates for that very reason too.
Yeah, every time we had a request come in for an assessment on my team, I had 44 team members, and on each of my team members, I had a spreadsheet. On each of the spreadsheets, I had so many things to help me understand what their context was, where they lived in the country, obviously what their gender was, what their demographic was, what their age was, what their background experience and cases they worked was. I mean, I had all these things together. So when I had a request come in, I was able to go through this criteria so I could make, I could have at least one expert for the field that we were going to be interviewing and creating strategies for, but also I wanted to make sure I had people that knew the demographic that we're interviewing in, had an opposing opinion on that. I mean, it's pretty complicated, but I had this great strategy to do all this. And then when I brought the team together for a yearly training, I put one of the challenges that we had out that we came up with this great magical answer and it went really well in this one case. And I put it, with the team that I thought was so perfectly crafted by me. I put it out to all my team members and we did this exercise where, we had 10 different teams. Every single team came up with the exact same answer and it kind of befuddled me. And you know why? Because you had 4 people with that different, backgrounds working on the same problem. Again, more people, more relationships, more communication, better results.
Yeah, nice. Well, Robin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Where can people go to get a copy of your book and then learn more about you and the work you do?
Sure. Really simple. My website is peopleformula.com, all one word. On there, I got links to my books I have out, free online training course, lots of podcasts that I've done, as well as a couple keynote speeches that are on there for free. And then also you can reach out to me for any training or questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
We have a tendency to want to dive in when we have new technology to help us hire better, but learning how to make better decisions using human-to-human techniques still serves us well. While we're waiting for legal challenges, we talked about these with artificial intelligence and that video technology to screen candidates. I'm so glad to have Robin as a guest on the podcast today. This has been an informative and fascinating discussion, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I think that there is so much that we can learn from Robin and his work, whether it's engaging and building trust within our own teams, at home and in our personal lives, or when we're talking and working with our business leaders within our organizations. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed